So we're seemingly in a bit of a culture war, big surprise, for some time now, in a place of religious relativism where people want to scrap religious thought and dialogue from the public square. That's kind of current state of affairs. From your perspective, where are the areas of opportunity for evangelists to engage the culture head on? I know a lot of your work and your material does it. I know we were talking actually just before hopping on here about one of the documentaries you did, Reaching the Unaffiliated. So it seems to you seem to have a bit of a knack and like a tie-in here about how we might do this. Where are some of the areas that you've seen for evangelists to engage the culture head on?
You know what? It could feel a little overwhelming, and I think it partly depends on how you're looking at it, right? So, you read headlines and it's like, oh my gosh, like it's just like you just feel like the faith is just shrinking on itself. So I think first taking a step back and not feeling like inaction will cause everything to just decay and fall apart. And so just being confident, like being comfortable in like not feeling there's like a time pressure on any of that stuff. And then just looking, so as you're like calm in it and not in panic mode, because I think once we go in panic mode, it's a culture war and all that stuff. You start to be like, oh my gosh, any opportunity I have to like take advantage of it. Okay, let's just be calm. And you just kind of evaluate like where you're at and who's in your life and who's around you. And I think at first it has to start with your life as an example. So if your life is not an example of what it should be, then just stop what you're doing and don't even talk to anyone until you get that figured out. Yeah. Once you feel like your life, if someone like, everyone's, got an imperfect life, but I mean like, if someone spent a couple of days with you, they'd be like, oh, okay, yeah, he or she is probably living it. Then you're in a good starting point there, okay? And so I think if you're at that spot, if you're not at that spot, then it's really critical to get that right. And really, like, that should be reflected in your loved ones. That should be reflected in your spouse, in your relationship to your parents, your siblings, your kids, friends, and really just dial that in. Okay, so you're good there and you want to still engage and you feel like, okay, but I still want to do more. I think it just comes smaller and figuring out what feels, the most authentic to where you're at. So I think some people have a lot of styles based on maybe their past. So, I've noticed, so I feel like, so cradle Catholic, I feel like I've kind of always been in the church. My mom never let me miss mass. So just being around a lot and seeing different types of people come in and out of the church. A lot of people I've seen that have had like, kind of a crazy past, we'll say, have went from one side and then they go way to the other. And so like they have no problem being really intense, really in your face. And that does talk to some people and that's good. But finding your voice and then just being as authentic as you can in that voice. And so, I don't know. In one way, I have no advice, but in another way, it's like there's so many different ways you can do it, and you can do that. Like totally. So the documentary you mentioned, reaching out to the unaffiliated. So it came to us from the USCCB, and it was designed. So it's about a 30-minute doc, give or take, and it was designed for to speak just to bishops. It wasn't actually meant for public consumption. We were very clear at the beginning, like, hey, so this is just like kind of just within, like, maybe we'll put it out later or something wider, but like that's really not our intent. It's to speak to bishops top down to kind of as that leadership in reaching like the 5 kind of principles on how to bring people back to the church. And so that has a good if it's about like how can you bring people back to the church, looking at the 5 core principles that are, part of the church, or we mentioned it in the documentary, and then just seeing where those fit in, so one of it's beauty, one of it's service. And if you're trying to evangelize to people in your own life, leaning on those and making sure that you're doing that, in your own life, so like, if you're going to talk about how the church is so all big in service and they serve the poor and they do all this stuff and that's all you're saying, but you don't actually do that yourself, then you might want to start doing that if you're going to be speaking on that. But maybe it's the beauty stuff. So it's a bunch of different things. So I don't know. I didn't really fully answer your question, but I feel like hopefully a starting
There's
point.
There's some answers in there. There's some meat. There's some meat that people can gnaw on a little bit and think about. You're calling everybody a sinner pretty much. So which is kind of the reality, right?
Self-included. I just have a big problem with when people are so focused on and whatever their thing is, like it doesn't matter. You could insert anything, whether it's the church or whether it's anything, any number of stuff. But like they're not like things aren't right at home, And I don't mean like at home, but just like they got to get themselves kind of situated. So I think that's you got to line yourself up with God and making sure that like, because you're like, what? You're asking people to like, no, you should follow God in the church and all that stuff, but like, you're not doing it yourself. You're not. Yeah, like, get out of here,
Yeah.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for checking out this clip from the Practical Theism podcast. If you enjoyed this clip and you want to check out the full episode, you can do so by finding it on our YouTube channel. Definitely consider subscribing and ringing that little bell so you can continue to get updates, notifications when we release new episodes and new clips just like this one. I hope to see you soon.